video. Today we are going to see the epic clash of titans between Gukesh D and Magnus Carlsen. As you know, Gukesh is the current world chess champion while Magnus is the world number 1. Let's look into the game. Gukesh opens up with e4. Magnus replies with e5. As we know, Magnus really likes this e5 move to be in his repertoire. After knight to f3, Gukesh is attacking the e5 pawn and Magnus defends it while developing his knight. Gukesh plays the Ruy Lopez opening. It is also known as the Spanish opening. Magnus plays a Berlin and invites Gukesh to play for a draw. However, Magnus' strategy still remains to draw this game and get into an Armageddon where Gukesh might not show up well in the time pressure. After d3, when white defends the pawn on e4, Magnus plays bishop to c5. It's a common and classic move in the Berlin opening. c3. White is just building a grasp around the center and controlling it with maximum power. After black short castles, white short castles, d6, and in this structure what Gukesh has to do is to play h3, because after the pin of bishop to g4 it will not be a very pleasant position for white. Gukesh plays h3. a6. Black attacks the bishop and asks the bishop the question where it's gonna go. Is it gonna take the knight or is it gonna drop back? Gukesh chooses to maintain his bishop pair and play bishop to a4. After some time, this bishop can also drop back to c2 and attack with d5. h6. The rook supports the pawn on e4 and it wants to play d4. After rook to e1, now white and black have various strategies that have been tried and tested. Trust me, they are in the database. b5, bishop to c2, and now the major idea that white can play is d4. This has been widely played in the centuries and this is very nasty idea, because once you control the center, then there are many chances of attacking. Bishop to b6. This is the typical arc-angle structure that Magnus has chosen. Knight b to d2. What Gukesh is trying to do is he's just pulling out his knight, getting it to f1, then maybe to g3, and then Gukesh has a very good grasp in the center. He is playing the game in a positional style. Knight to e7. What black is trying to do is get the knight to g6. After getting the knight to g6, he has various ideas of playing c5 and getting even more control of the center while preventing d4 for white. a4. What Gukesh is trying to do is he's breaking the center, and he's also, before breaking the center, he's also threatening to break pawn structure in the queen side. Rook to b8. So that Gukesh cannot take a free pawn. Note that after a into b5, a into b5 and rook into a8, Gukesh wins a rook. d4. Gukesh is trying to break open. Knight to g6, knight to f1 and c5. The typical idea. Knight to g3. c takes d4, c takes d4, and now you don't really want to recapture with the e pawn. Why? Because then you build an IQP. It is also known as an isolated queen's pawn. It's a big weakness in the endgame. Trust me, you wouldn't want to do that. After b takes a4, bishop takes a4, bishop to b7 and d5, I don't really like what white and black are doing. They are just trying to draw the game. Because let's imagine that the a pawn and the b pawn are removed from the board. Then we have a very symmetrical pawn structure. this is not going towards Gukesh, as after the Armageddon, Magnus will play for an advantage. A5. Black solidifies the pawn. Bishop to e3. This is targeting the bishop, but this is more of a development type of move, because you aren't really gonna capture that bishop. Bishop to c8 and b3. This move was very important, because if the black bishop moves or takes the bishop on e3, the rook will be trying to capture the b2 square. This is not good. After taking the bishop, white recaptures with the rook. It's a very good strategy, because the rook is also getting active and you are not getting double weak pawns on the e3 and e4 squares. Knight to f4. Magnus is trying to jump in Gukesh's kingside, and what's crazy about this position is that there are many chances of playing bishop into h3, pawn takes h3, knight takes h3, and even after king g2 there might even be some chances of knight to g4. It's crazy. Rook to b4. Magnus is missing the opportunity. Queen to c2, g6, king to h1. The bishop is developing. Queen to a2, bishop to d3. I really like this bishop to d3 move, because Magnus is completely ignoring the threat on the a5 square, and already he is starting to pose problems for the e4 pawn. Knight to d2, a passive response by Gukesh. As you can see, it's minus 2.1, which means Magnus has a slight edge. But how does he convert this into a win? It's very difficult, even for a world number 1. h5. Magnus is pressing over the king side, and it's very deadly. If h4 comes, then the whole center falls apart. White can't play h4 himself. It's a common idea, but not possible in this position. If white plays h4, there's knight to g4, attacking the rook, attacking the pawn. This is very deadly. White takes the queen. After black takes the queen back, rook takes the queen, h4. Finally, Magnus is jumping into action. And this move is, I'll say it's a brilliant move from my side, because you can't really take that knight, can you? For example, if you move the knight back, this pawn falls apart. But if you try to exchange the rooks, for example, in this move order, or like this is a very interesting idea, because you are also threatening the knight, also threatening the bishop. If the knight moves, the bishop falls. If the bishop moves, the knight falls. It's pretty good idea. But after rook here, it's just the same thing. Magnus is saying, hey Gukesh, let's continue the pressure. Rook to a2, king to g7. This is a very nice, interesting development idea, because what Magnus is doing right here is basically getting the king to a more active position. No back rank threats, active king, superior endgame for Magnus. Rook to a7. Gukesh is just trying to play actively and counter-attack Magnus's king. Rook to d4, getting a grasp over the center and stabilizing the position. But knight to f3, Gukesh goes for blood. After pawn takes and recaptures, the knight is threatened, the rook is threatened, and after the rook is threatened, even the bishop is threatened. This is such a maze. And Magnus escapes. Knight takes h3. And note that right here, both the players have very limited time. Pawn takes, bishop takes, king to h2. This is a slight inaccuracy by Gukesh, but still manageable. Now, Magnus plays rook to to d1, but the winning idea was to take, and after this move sequence, finally Magnus wins a pawn and has a very clear passed pawn. This is good for Magnus. However, his choice is a bit different. Let's go. Rook to d1, pawn to g4. Gukesh is trying to be aggressive and he is trying to mess up the position even more. If he messes up the position, Magnus doesn't find a clear path, then he might find a way to get advantage and even capitalize on a blunder by Magnus Carlsen in the future. Bishop takes d5. Bishop takes, and after this exchange, White's position isn't very good. You know why? It's because White is already down a pawn and Black has two passed pawns which are connected and they are in the center. Rook to e2. Knight to f4 attacking the rook. The rook slides to c2. He's trying to create some amount of counterplay, like he can even play like rook to c7. King goes to f6, even more active. h4. What Gukesh is trying to do, he has a very simple strategy. He's just cutting off every square near the king, and this is very nasty. King to e6, knight to g5 check, and the king is running. Did you see where the king was running from? First is castle, then it went to g7, then f6, and after e6 it got chased, and now it's on d5. Rook to a5 check, and the king is running even more. King to d4, rook to a4 check, and right here Magnus has the opportunity to repeat moves if he wants, but he sees that he might be winning this position. Although it's complicated, he can find a way out. However, he's also trying to utilize Gukesh's time advantage. He has a very nice advantage over Gukesh right here. Rook to f2, and f6 is a blunder by Magnus Carlsen. What he could do, he could simply play rook h8. It was the best move. He was threatening the h4 square, and after that it was completely falling. For example, after rook h8, White's king side completely falls, and after that there is no good continuation for White. f6, rook to f3 check. Gukesh decides that before retreating the knight, if he gives this one check, he might find a better advantage. King to e2. At this point, the position is near equal. Although Magnus has a pawn, his king is severely misplaced. Rook to a2 check. Another check. Rook to d2. Rook takes, king takes, and knight to e5 check. After knight to e4 check, just imagine if White's king was like somewhere on g3 and Black's king was somewhere on like e7, then it was completely winning for Black, because then every pawn would be defended. Knight to e4 check. Gukesh does not even capture the free pawn because he realizes that after capturing the free pawn, he hangs a rook. d5, knight takes, and here I would say that Magnus could still fight for a win. It's 38 seconds for Gukesh and 55 seconds for Magnus. Rook to f2 check, king to e1, and the knight jumps in to d7. This position is fairly equal for both the sides. What Gukesh has to do is very simple, while Magnus is still finding some options. Knight to e2 check. This is the biggest mistake of the game. Why is this so big? Why is it a blunder? Well, it is a blunder because after rook takes e2, king takes e2, and knight takes f8, there is a small calculation mistake by Magnus which will result in a loss for him. Let's see how it happens. What Magnus might have calculated here is that once the pawn runs, it will promote before the knight can reach it. But Gukesh, with just 37 seconds left, continues his knight journey. He threatens the pawn, and there's one nasty trick here. Just imagine, if black plays d2, there's knight to e4, and after promotion, there's knight to c3, check, and then it's a winning king and pawn endgame for Gukesh. King to e3. Magnus visualizes the sequence. Knight to a4, e4, h5. Gukesh is trying to create a passed pawn of his own. Gukesh has a passed pawn now. Knight to b2 is a killing sequence. It's not only restricting the black's play, but also after this move, it gives a check, threatens the e3 pawn. Magnus' only option is king to e2, and after king to f4, it's lost for Magnus. At this point, Magnus got very frustrated. It's natural, because he's a world number one. But he blundered so hard and he couldn't calculate a sequence which he usually would calculate. It's easy to be frustrated in such situations. He bangs the table, and after banging the table, he shakes his head and gives his hand out for resignation. For more interesting games, we will cover even more interesting games in this same tournament, and subscribe to my channel for more updates and